As the whole world reels in horror still at the latest killing by ICE agents in Minneapolis, can reform in the UK continue to get away with their references to America, connections with the Trump administration, and leaning on the sort of Doge style of efficiencies in government as their big offer in the Scottish elections we discuss? And we look also at Andy Burnham's knockback from standing in the forthcoming by-election that would have let him jump in as a new Labour leader. Will it all just be brushed under the carpet? How successful will that be? Scottish Labour seem to have got a new tactic of mandamification. Well, that sort of refers to the groovy videos, the walking, talking, jazzy music, jumping camera shots employed by Anna Sarwar. Will that work, and does it cut much ice? And while we're at it, my column on the Scots fans potentially boycotting the World Cup over Greenland, it did go down like a lead balloon. So those are the headlines. Here's the podcast.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Lesley Riddoch podcast. Lesley, you've returned from Burns nights afar. Fair for your honest, sonsy-faced great chieftain o' the biscuit race. Aboon them all, you take your place, hobnob, ginger nut, or digestive. Weel are you wordy o' a grace, as lang as my arm. The groaning tea plate there you fill, your mallow dome like a distant hill. Your wafer would help plug a dike in time o' need. While though through your wrapper the coconut crumb distill like flecks of amber. I think your Burns supper would have been a heck of a lot better than Keir Starmer's miserable unionist biscuit plate and tin of iron brew.
Aha, that's where that's coming from. I did wonder. I wondered if you had sort of X-ray vision to sort of spot the old almond biscuit crumbs in the corner of the table here. No, that was pretty poor, wasn't it? It was actually as bad as... It was actually reminded me of Rishi. Remember that plaintive Rishi Sunak? Was it Alone at Hogmanay? Or Christmas, that wasn't it? Where he was he had got a football and he was basically trying to show...
because he was going down through... Yes, that was mental. Although that was very high production values as he kind of cruised round through number 10 on his own.
But that was even sadder because then he got the people in there filming him who could have easily said to him, Rishi, this is as bad an idea as anything you've ever had, whereas that was like one snap. Okay, that could have been a bit of a mistake, but still. Actually, I know we're plunging into something else, but I was reading a brilliant article by Neil Mackay in the Herald, actually, who's, the whole situation in Minneapolis and the States will be on everybody's minds. And obviously, as somebody who grew up in Northern Ireland, he sort of said a lot of what I've been thinking about watching what's happening in the streets of the United States. He says reminds him of nothing so much as Northern Ireland in 1969, a country ready to blow. And actually, Neil, being a bit younger than me, would have been... a bairn, a real toddler, actually, I think then. I do remember that. But what he goes on to talk about was just the astonishment at, that Nigel Farage's links with Trump will be something that, he's thinking will finally halt the progress of reform, which I've no doubt we'll go on to talk about. Yeah. And he was picking up one particular thing and finally getting to the point about these kind of totally misguided social media things. He was picking up something I didn't see with all the gadding about with a Reform candidate for London Mayor, Lesley Cunningham. Now, he's really got eagle eyes on this because I don't think it would be a high priority for any of us to be surfing through our material. But there had been a really weird post, on top of all the weird ones from the White House during that period where he looked like he wanted to invade Greenland imminently. And fact ends, really, where that one's gone. But anyway, so this weird post that came from the White House featured an image of Trump holding the flipper of a penguin as they walked across a snowy landscape towards Greenland with the text reading, "Embrace the penguin." Right, so just take that one in. The scary thing is that works for some people, but still. So back to Lesley Cunningham, the Reform candidate for London Mayor. She posted a picture of herself on Sunday holding a penguin by the flipper as they walked across a frozen landscape towards a snowy London. And the tagline was, "Choose a new path for London before it's too late." This is, as he says himself, sort of barking beyond all words. And he observed quite rightly, unless that path leads straight to the nearest mental health clinic, I imagine most Londoners will give her a pass. But his point is to show how utterly ingrained devotion to Trump is. within reform. Utterly unreflective. Trump's our guy. Even when you listen to Malcolm Offord, who's, being done on the rounds on everything at the moment, he even talks about, producing a mini Doge for Scotland so that you can weed your way through the civil service and pull out everything that isn't worth it to cut costs. As if that whole idea of Doge and the department that was created in America to basically slash funding for everything until basically nothing works is something that most people would actually support in Scotland. So these guys are so wedded to Trump thinking, his language, his abbreviations, all the kind of ludicrous ideas that he's managing to paper the walls with in America, that I hope he's right, that they're walking into a moment where, every European leader has identified the old, including, well, you've got to add Mark Carney in here from Canada, although not European. The old order is dead, and still reform is trying to make that bridge to a country that just doesn't want to know anymore.
You mentioned mental health in regards to reform there. I don't know if you noticed this morning that Suella Braverman has also defected to reform. So they're still picking up their rejected high-profile Tories. But a very sort of grumpy Conservative central office put out an official press statement saying that basically this was all to do with her mental health issues, and has had to abruptly reverse ferret on it and apologise because they've quite rightly been roundly condemned as an atrocious bit of politicking to suggest that she had a mental health problem and they'd been trying to support her through that, but it was only a matter of time before she fluttered off to reform. So
it's just
Tory HQ in a bit of a tailspin.
Striking these really bum notes as if nobody is kind of reality proofing it. I mean, they'd said it was always a matter of when, not if, Suella would defect. The Conservatives did all we could to look after Suella's mental health, but she was clearly very unhappy. I mean, you can, however, say what you want. Well, I mean, I watched just, the fragments. There's that, I'm just looking at that picture there was a fleeting moment where on the stage, after she'd given, I mean, you've got to say a pretty weird sort of statement, right enough, about how, she was coming home and she tried to sort of give it a little bit of a real emotional bit in the voice there where she, she really felt she could, whatever it was, make a difference. A little voice cracked, with sincerity. And then for just a nanosecond, she leant her head on Nigel Farage's shoulder, which is like
weird, like Daddy, I'm back. I'm like, what the heck?
It's just like, God. And of course, I thought, I'll tell you, that wee nano moment there, that's going to be on and I'm just looking at the front page of The Guardian. There it is. I got to say, with Farage looking, I mean, there's nothing will ever throw that guy, but standing there looking a bit like this is a bit weird. And it is a bit blimmin' weird on top of weird, all of the defectors. And I guess that the coverage of it is also obviously strange because whilst it seems to matter hugely to the commentators that are kind of, pouring out over every moment of whether Robert Jenrick is indeed the heavyweight that he used to be, to anybody in Scotland, I mean, to the average bear in Scotland, Robert Jenrick was an idiot you'd never vote for.
Totally.
So we're having
she was doubly bad. I didn't even have the profile of Jenrick, albeit having been a previous Home Secretary. With all her mad statements and desperate desire to see a front page of the Telegraph with planes taking off and going on early morning raids with the police and what have you. I don't see that had a great cohort of support in Scotland.
No, but that's the thing that Offord is being trotted out as a different guy. And I've got to say, watching him, he's hard to flip. He is a multimillionaire. He's kind of shrugged off all questions about the size of his wealth. I noticed today that the only people he was on this morning, and Martin Geisler gave him a going over on Good Morning Scotland. I'm never going to remember what it is. But there's a thing that they keep trotting out that nobody keeps picking up. So Offord can give you, figures at the drop of a hat of how much something costs, how much, percentage it would be. And I mean, as Martin Geisler rightly pointed out, the reform in Scotland are wanting to basically reduce income taxes, not just to be the same as south of the border, but to be lower so that would turbocharge growth. And as Martin Geisler kind of pointed out to him, well, it would be a strange thing then that we're actually just ahead in growth terms at the moment of the UK average with higher taxes. So how does that work, And he just kind of, so if Alford just sort of guffawed about this and said, oh, it's all point something, it's all pathetic, we need turbocharging, which is just, where in the world is this turbocharging working was a pretty reasonable question. But the key one that nobody's asking these guys is that all the parallels that someone like Alford makes is with American growth rates. Now, lots of questions you could bring to that. But let's just look at the levels of poverty in America, the levels of inequality, the problems with health, where people still haven't got essentially a national health service. Just if you wanted to throw it in the entire blooming economy, the fact that I still think it's true that 1 in 3 black men under 25 are in jail. So, and of course, everything else, people are being shot in the street for nothing.
Yeah.
There are, migrant, basically people from any kind of ethnic minorities who might be targeted as illegal migrants are not going to school, they're not going to work. There's had to be whole parallel systems set up to let people cower in their homes. And you want to make a parallel with America? Would somebody please come out of the woodwork with the next interview and just really challenge them on this? Because they're getting away with making these references to America as if it's the same place. It was always a problematic place and people should always have picked this up. If you wanted, and people may know what's coming here, but if you really want to make parallels to the countries with the most solid overall performance in every aspect of their economics, look east. It's not the Americas, it's the small countries of the Nordics and Northern Europe. But nobody wants to pull that kind of framing on any of these things. And if you were to look that way, Scotland is the only part of the UK moving in the right direction to have progressive taxation. Of course, there's much, much more to do. But, we'll still... Somebody's got to be bold enough to just update their thinking on how good it is to make parallels with America right now.
Like the irrelevant Danes with their paltry trillions of dollars of, I think they've got 10 billion in US treasuries, despite having been dismissed by the US Treasury Secretary as being irrelevant last week or the week before, and as the Greenland stuff kind of came to a crescendo, and then just sort of in the usual Trump chickens out taco style just kind of petered into nothing. It's quite incredible. What did you make of the Davos U-turn, as it seemed to be?
Well, it was very interesting. If you read lots of different, analysis of what's going on, it does look very much that it was the markets, essentially, what done it, because the markets believed that the EU would use this anti-coercion instrument, keep forgetting the name, the trade bazooka thing. And that began to pull the markets down. Many people, there's another analysis that says Mark Rutte, the Dutch, the head of NATO and the former Dutch premier, had been the one that sort of whispered into his ear. But this to me strikes me, everybody's trying to understand these big kind of movements of what's going on at the moment in terms of goodies, baddies, and people with faces. And okay, obviously, Trump's the best example of how one human can change an awful lot of policy. And yet, it's with Trump, it's always the money. And so it's fine that Mark Rutte can, stand in the middle of it and whisper Dutch things to him that seem to make sense. But I'm pretty sure it probably was the threat of having massive retaliatory measures which would affect the markets, which would affect him. Now, there's actually really interesting kind of analysis around asking, however, whether the Europeans would have had the cojones to basically use their blasted, bazooka, because there's tortuous processes. It's basically like the United States without a federal level, because this, for all that Brussels gets pelters, it has none of the same sort of functionality and power of the presidency. So there's no one view is going to come out of Europe very easily here, and that's a bit of a problem that Europe's going to have to sort out if it wants to start flexing its muscle. And people sort of speculating as well that it's been such a long, long time that Europeans have sort of lent against the Americans for pretty much everything, that it actually it's like it's like a muscle memory problem that you've got all this capacity to stand up on your own and be, as I think it was Ursula von der Leyen talked about, we now must have an independent Europe, which I think is a framing a lot of people will find kind of odd. But actually, you do need to start getting in your brain that these muscles can move independent of the stick you've been carrying for a very long time to support you, because they've got mechanisms in there which they're almost unable to use because it just feels wrong. And it's strange that Need said, there's various people who went in to Davos and basically told it like it was. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who was talking about the kneecaps. Gavin Newsom went in, who was, I think, one of the former bank chiefs. And he was talking about, come on, you Europeans, get off your knees. He said, I didn't expect to come here and have knee pads or be handing out knee pads to you guys. Somebody told me later that actually people were accusing him of trying to kind of, flog merchandise. It was a bit of a joke thing. And he actually turned up with customized Newsom knee pads as merch, basically, to hand out around Davos. So, there's plenty of people trying to kind of slap the Europeans out of the head and say, this needs a really major, major moment of change. But coming back to your comment about the Danes, there's another thing that happened last week that was singled out by a writer in The Guardian as being really important, because what is starting to happen is that other countries are selling the US bonds they hold, the Chinese, pretty big time. Now, I'm no expert in all the kind of high finances, but essentially that is causing a lot of problems in America. The Danes, one retirement fund for Danish academics has decided to sell all its US government bonds. There's billions of pounds in this fund, actually, at the end of this month. So what's that? In kind of 4 days' time? And the guys in charge of that has said the decision is rooted in the poor American government finances. So it's not directly related to the rift, but that they've just decided it's not useful to hold American government bonds anymore. That's a beacon. The reason this has been singled out is because that fund could be a beacon for other pension funds and to start divesting themselves really of the American dollar and of American government bonds. And if that happens, the Guardian, many others suggesting the Europeans could create a market for bonds denominated in euros. That could create a rival market to American Treasury bonds. That could offer a safe haven that would drain the American market even further. People who understand this will basically say, there's a set of muscles you could be using in there. And basically, you aren't at the moment, you aren't even discussing it. But as ever, the guys at the centre of it who are looking at returns, confidence about the future, all that sort of stuff, they're looking at America again very differently and just thinking, game over for this.
Well, I mean, part of this seems to be what Trump wanted way back in the beginning last year of his presidency, was to actually devalue the dollar to make American exports more competitive. And the Chinese have always kind of bought up these US Treasury bonds for political leverage, kind of like, when you can grasp these pebbles from my hand, you'll be the master. They hold a lot of the cards, and Trump was busy, mumping his gums around Davos, saying that the US had all the cards in a way that it doesn't. But of course, it's entirely US policy over the last sort of 50, 60 years to have this military expansionism and to have the Europeans fully integrated in US defence policy and to be lent on. So it wasn't as if it was kind of laziness and we've got to kind of come and prop you up the whole time. This was a kind of determined strategic aim. If they're moving away from it, they're moving away from it. Newsom, the governor of California, was similarly saying that, we've got a big economy and we're not putting up with this kind of rubbish. And we're just not going to take the kind of crap that he's playing. Then, of course, Trump made those appalling remarks about NATO in Afghanistan, which I think just tipped everybody, understandably, over the edge. It was just an incredible insult to the number of military personnel who'd died in service, many of whom were Scottish, of course. I think there's sort of 457, was it, British service personnel killed, not to say the number wounded or mentally affected by their time there.
And I mean, it might, I think the other thing with that, because it was appalling, but then you kind of think Trump just does appalling every single day, or in his name, appalling happens. Nurse Alex Pretty just shot dead in the street in Minneapolis. That's on you, Trump. So, there's many actual deaths now, as well as that reference, that dismissive, contemptuous reference of just getting completely carried away with sort of Europe, you little people, and just chucking the baby out with the bathwater. But I'd imagine for people who got anyone who was involved in the Afghanistan or Iraq conflicts, you're looking at it as parents perhaps or service personnel and just asking yourself generally, what was that all about? So, which in fact doubtless has been being asked for quite a long time. And so by bringing it up again, it almost is the first time there's been a chance to kind of go back into that for a lot of people. And it really must hurt to think you must have lost your son or daughter for something that has resulted only in the Taliban running Afghanistan again. I mean, that's just heartbreaking. But we never visited that during that terrible period of the half-arsed and half-hearted attempt to get some people out. So it's sort of sat there like a hurt that hasn't been unpacked properly. Well, thanks, Trump, because you did it in a second. So I hope that everybody's getting up to speed with there's nothing that matters to this guy, just nothing. I mean, when I was doing the Burns Supper up in Newton Moor, I almost hesitated to bring Donald Trump into it. But you're going to just look at the horrible, almost illiterate, I want, I think, I'll sell, you'll sell kind of language at this time of year, framed against the incredible lyricism of, Robert Burns and the different kind of society he's talking about, which is actually the society that the founding fathers of America embedded into the, Declaration of Independence, because Abraham Lincoln went nowhere without a book of Burns. So much of that thinking about a man's a man for all that, and, that it's coming yet for all that man to man, the world hour. Well, brothers be for all that. Now, Trump could hardly have more contempt for that kind of philosophy, but it's the only one that's going to save the planet, and it's the one we vote for, and it's the one we should have to keep in touch with, as all of this money selling and just trading brute force stuff continues, because there's another network of powers around the world, and it's not just his call.
And we were in New York last week and visited the Burns statue in Central Park, one of the 4 around the world. And I see in the Courier there was big concerns about the state of the one in Dundee, which is covered in a lot of bird guano. But this is a hugely powerful symbol for Scots culture and for liberty across the whole of the globe.
Well, it totally is. And I mean, as I was reading, I'm sure there'll be people who are better informed, but I was reading a lot of the history of the Burns statues, the Burns Supper, the suggestion even that actually quite a number of unionists back in the day were very happy to see Burns kind of tidied up into a dignified figure, thus the statues and even some of the Burns Suppers, to make sure he couldn't be kind of claimed by, the rabble, as it were, and by those independent supporters who could see in his work an awful lot about, the need to have dignity as a nation, not to reject the parcel of rogues and all that sort of stuff. But for whatever reasons, the statues, the Burns Suppers, I mean, there was apparently 110 in Northern Ireland this weekend, quite apart from anything else. So, and doubtless there would still be quite a few in Russia, although that's probably not a great badge of pride these days. But still, the point is, it's out there now. And actually, when you're trying to look for words that really perfectly represent the values that are the exact opposite of what we're having to deal with, you don't have to go much further than Burns. So, everybody should. But I have to say, the Burns Suppers, I've been going to the Burns Suppers I'm going to, we're all getting on a bit. And I really think folk are going to have to think a little bit about actually going to schools and doing, maybe, I know this is a bit old-fashioned, but getting the kids to learn. If any kid can learn the whole of Tam O'Shanter and do it, blimmin' heck, it's quite a thing. Or any of these, other poems, and bring them into the Burns suppers. They bring their pals in, bring their mums and dads. We've got to jump generations on this. Otherwise, the Burns supper's going to go with us.
Well, I mean, before we get letters in, I mean, certainly my kids were all doing Burns at their school. They had a Burns day last week and doing various different bits of poetry recitation. And I'm sure it certainly is a big thing across schools across Scotland. But I think you're right. There maybe needs to be more of an effort to bridge that gap between the kind of older adult Burns supper and the whiskey and the kind of late night action and bring kind of younger people in their 20s and make it a kind of interesting and exciting destination.
But I mean, if I take, I'm a tedious teetotaler, so it wouldn't worry me not to have too much of the whiskey about. Although I'm sure, 15 and 16-year-olds have seen a dram sitting on the table that they don't necessarily need to drink. The point simply, absolutely, is it's maddening that actually there is stuff going on in schools. And then when you go to Burns suppers, there's nobody under the age of 60. I'm exaggerating slightly for effect. I think the organisers need to go and try to get that link in with schools and get them in to be, there's people who've been doing, I remember my dad used to do this. He used to do Holy Willie's prayer. And we used to be rolling around laughing at him because he was brilliant at it. He would practice on us before he did it in Belfast. And he also, did Tam O'Shanter. They're tremendous. And they need quite a lot of personality to do really well. So for sure, it's such a long poem, and the prospects of you suddenly forgetting a line must be, hideous. So I could kind of well imagine you need to be quite a kind of substantial and probably older person to be able to carry that one off. But, to the Ode to the Haggis, any of these things could be done by a 16-year-old. And it just needs some people to kind of move over. And again, let me just take the whole blooming thing in my head here now. I think some women could actually be useful at the top level of all this, because they very often are better at making communications across the way and just saying gently to someone, I know you've done this for the last 500 years, but how about that 16-year-old? Let's try and do this thing.
Yeah. Well, that's a shout out for next year, certainly. All this kind of liberty and Scots and the Scots links to America brings us kind of neatly into your column about the dilemma of whether Scotland should boycott the World Cup. I think that's kind of slightly ebbed as the chickening out in chief has slightly kind of moved his eye off of Greenland, or he's had the existing Greenland deal kind of repackaged and posted back under his nose going, this is what you've already got, but we've kind of changed some of the titles around, you could potentially have call it a sovereign base in the way that the UK has in Cyprus. But you wrote last week in the National, I hope you didn't look at any of the comments, that Scotland should seriously consider boycotting the World Cup.
Well, yes, and I didn't look at the comments. It's a terrible thing to say. You couldn't get up in the morning if you actually read comments on anything. And I knew, I'm not stupid, but that's the point, right? Is that what is more important in all of this? The only thing, of course, that is important for everybody is the World Cup. And I'll quite grant you that if you've shelled out thousands of quids already to get your tickets and your hotels and everything organised, that is a very, very different kind of proposition than just having a sort of what you might think is an airy-fairy sort of abstract liberal positioning thing on it. But it wasn't me that started this, actually. I mean, what prompted me to write this was listening to Andy Smith, who's chair of the Scottish Football Union fan group, and he was on saying on Radio Scotland a Rubicon was crossed with the talk of taking Greenland. He said, a Rubicon has been crossed. With Trump's Greenland threat, we hit a sinkhole. We have every right to expect the SFA to ask FIFA for a plan B. That is, if Trump went ahead with it. And he said, the world body has 4 billion quid with which it could switch games to Canada and Mexico and reimburse fans. Now, I know this is like a massive blooming hassle and everything, but pigs might fly. The idea that FIFA's ever going to, the guys who gave Trump his blimmin', substitute crown or whatever it was that they handed over. They're hardly likely to be the guys who are going to do anything radical about this, and certainly not the fans at the top priority. Wouldn't have thought that seems to be the case for many of these organisations. But I still think the question is really worth asking, and it's principally because the Tartan Army has acquired, a kind of reputation of being more than just a bunch of individuals who wander the planet supporting Scotland. They have got a kind of moral stance, and some of that comes from collecting money from children's charities in every foreign, European city they go to, just quietly and handing it over. No, that doesn't need to happen, but it does. I mean, clearly with the old No Scotland, No Party lark back in the day, Ali Murray, who was the big tall lad for Lewis, that was known as Brolly Man, who walked through, was it Munich?
Yeah.
With the brolly, or the wee man with a Zimmer, with a pal of his beside him, and the two of them were walking Druitt because it was absolutely pissing with rain, and they had the brolly or the wee man, and the two of them were Druitt, cans in the other hand, brolly or the wee man, walking across this square to keep him dry. And that's what hit, the headlines across Germany. That picture was framed by an agency in Germany. It was then put on German public transport as a kind of, you gotta love these people. Well, if you just want to be the same old fans as everybody else that doesn't care about anything, you're not being those people, and you're not being that kind of image of the Tartan Army. So I'll grant you, it was always going to get pelters. But I think for Scots, the way we're seen, and coming back to this time of year to see ourselves as others see us, we are seen as people who've just got a bit of moral authority about ourselves and take some moral decisions. And if there had been a prospect, and I quite grant you that, I said in the column why you would worry about the prospect of tariffs when, Trump changes his mind every blimmin' day. And that, of course, is exactly what came to pass. But the more important point is, how would everybody feel about going to America if the gunboats were basically loading American troops and had killed a Greenlander? How would you feel about that? And maybe you'd say, I would feel bad, but life goes on, and, sport has got to be a repository of life that's basically immune from all the pressures of politics and everything like that. Well, that, of course, you can have that point of view. And many people came on to talk about the different sporting events that had gone on in Saudi, and all sorts of different Olympics as well, and why there was no, in fact, there were many boycott calls and all of that. But one of the interesting moments was it was being discussed on Radio Scotland, and John Beattie, the former Scotland rugby player, was the interviewer. I mean, do you know John's usually not you want to say he's kind of a weeping liberal in any kind of way, but I was really struck when he said to one of the callers, I was on the Lions tour of South Africa and always regretted it. I should have been stronger and refused. Seeing apartheid South Africa close up changed my life. Well, that's quite something. And I, again, appreciate that it was, in a sense, more straightforward to deal with South Africa, because I remember back in the day, having been quite involved with this, the African National Congress requested a boycott from the rest of the world. So it didn't leave everybody with these endless, oh God, should we, shouldn't we? They just said, we want a sporting and economic boycott because it's the only way that change is going to come. So actually, you were going against what a representative body of the people, the black people of South Africa, wanted, to connect with them. And nothing similar has happened in the States. And for all the sort of slide into tyranny, fair elections are still happening, because otherwise Zoran Mandami wouldn't be mayor of New York. So I get all that. And I'm sure the comments are pretty fruity. And yet, if there was what has happened in the streets of America happening on the ice-covered streets of Greenland, I think we would all be in a very difficult position.
We would indeed. And the Greenlanders would not have taken it lying down. It's not as if there was just going to be a kind of walkover. So it would have been a conflict, and it would have been bloody, and it would have been awful, and it would have continued. Mm-hmm. some crafty guys that understand how to live in the ice would have quite happily seen off the US Army and its kind of political backbone to withstand losses. So it would have been a horrible, horrible thing, and it would have ground on for ages. So thank goodness it hasn't come to pass, and he has buckled.
Backed off for the minute. But the other thing is, because the Scots basically always identify with an underdog. Now, come on, could you get a smaller underdog than Greenland facing Donald Trump? This is not the right side of things you want to be on at all. And the other thing that did maybe actually just put me over the edge to write this, because I knew I'd just get pelters for it, but and he'd change his mind the second I'd actually hit the send button, which is exactly what happened. But it was listening to Stephen Flynn, who's usually very able to read a room, even a kind of, not visible one on radio. But he struck, I thought, a very dud note when he was joking that Scots had been boycotting the World Cup since 1998 and shouldn't be doing it again now. Now, I mean, I don't know, this has been a characteristic of SNP leaders for a very long time. Alex was always a great one for trying to weigh in with a sort of jokey line and then hit with something a bit serious. But I mean, just come on, this is not a joke, actually. And I appreciate I'm on the serious end of the network of this, and there'll be lots of Stephen's much more in touch with the Tartan Army and how the football clans work. But can they just please remember, it is not everyone in this country. I mean, we'll all be watching and we'll all be ups and down with whatever happens, but there's other things to weigh up. The end.
The end. Speaking of other things, the King of the North had a setback. This is the Southern King of the North.
This is a good one, actually.
Andy Burnham.
That should be the title for this one, the Southern King of the North.
Yes, definitely. No Gorton and Denton by-election as Keir Starmer flexes what he thinks are muscles.
Yeah, this is kind of the interesting thing about this is that there's a lot of speculation at the moment that actually that he was told ahead of time, that Burnham was told ahead of time that he would get the knockback and that he went ahead anyway with it, which is, he's saying is completely untrue. But I'm trying to find who it was now who's talking about that this morning on radio. So it sort of suggests it was a Peston programme sort of observation from this morning, where Robert Peston was saying that Burnham had been informed in no uncertain terms he would be repulsed if he applied to be the candidate, and that Number 10 therefore interpreted his application as an explicit attempt to destabilise Starmer. So Andy Burnham has basically said this is simply untrue, and the postings are going on with Burnham, with Peston posting follow-up messages with, in fact, now I should have read this whole thing before I started. Peston is saying that, in fact, he was wrong. And there's a very surreal set of exchanges going on here as to who basically told who what. But the thing that seems to be the case is that he's now saying that he will not be part of the election in 2027. And there's some comment from Starmer that he would be welcome to try for another seat in the northwest of England at the end of his mayoralty period. So they're sticking to that line that basically this was trying to diffuse, trying to avoid the extra expense. I just saw something like £500,000.
No, it's like 2.7 million or something.
Oh, well, there you are. Then it's, mega. So it's not small. To sort of, that they're sticking to the line that they didn't want to basically open up that contest when they didn't have to, which they would have done if Andy Burnham had jumped ship. However, I think there's 50 MPs have written a letter today. I just heard that as we started recording, so I'm not quite sure to what effect, but presumably appalled that Burnham was knocked back. And I noticed people are sent me somebody who's a member of Compass, which is the kind of slightly lefty kind of group within Labour. They are agitating quite a lot. And actually, the interesting thing about this newsletter was these guys setting out why they think Andy Burnham is such a good thing, which is, after all, quite important, and they're saying basically his advocacy of proportional representation and therefore cross-party pluralism is not nice to have, but an essential principle of a good society. So it's strange that this should be the thing that they pick on, because they're saying Burnham understands the crisis of everything requires everyone, that good politics is collaborative, and that the means shape the end. So they're talking about opposing the hyper-factionalists who control the Labour Party, and that by trying to kind of exert their control, they reveal how weak they are, what lack of trust they have, and what lack of confidence in the current leadership. So I don't know, what do you think? Because you've been knocking about Westminster a bit.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a lack of confidence. I suppose there is a line of argument that says that if you are in a leadership position like that, dealing with these things kind of when they're on the horizon as opposed to when they're at the gates is the better way forward. And whilst this is a kind of press blip that they're having just now, it'd be nowhere near as bad if he actually won, and then there'd be the sort of continual speculation that Burnham was not there just because he wanted to be back in Westminster as a backbench MP as part of a Labour landslide group that didn't exactly need propping up, and then there'd be all that kind of constant will he, won't he, when will he speculation. It certainly makes the Prime Minister's weakness even more apparent. It's a kind of control freakery that would normally only be seen in the Scottish National Party in terms of its pokery. But I mean, you have to reflect these things. It's not as if this kind of bad boys did it in Westminster and we're whiter than white. That's certainly not the case. And there's some very bum decisions made about selections of candidates across the board in all sorts of different political parties. So it's perhaps not unexpected.
So actually, I'm sure the listeners are now listening. God, this is more interesting than Andy Burnham. So what is the decision the SNP, you're going to regret this, my dear, what is the decision the SNP has made that is as kind of heinous, as it were, or as inviting hyper-factionalism, control freakery accusations as Starmer banning Andy Burnham from standing? Well,
I don't think he's anywhere near in the league of Andy Burnham, but of course we very recently had all of the hoo-ha about Tony Giuliano trying to get selected. I can't remember for where. It wasn't Dumbarton. He'd moved on to...
Is it Falkirk, actually?
Falkirk, yes. He'd moved on to yet another area. And was blocked from standing by a kind of spurious complaint of bullying, which once the selection process was finished was found not to be worth having a complaint about. And you're all back in, old boy, and maybe you can get somewhere in the regional list, and no harm, no foul. You had, of course, the South of Scotland regional list in the 2021 election with Joan
McAlpine.
It was McAlpine. I was about to say Joan McAlpine, and then I thought I was getting that wrong. But yeah, Joan McAlpine being doofed off of that, despite the fact that she was the stronger candidate and would have ranked more highly. There's all sorts of ins and outs that go on. You could continue. Kind of National Executive Committee has decided that for this particular contest the rules are going to look like this, and then we're going to change them all again next week. So pay attention.
So. Yes, okay. So then hands up, everybody does this kind of thing. But I suppose the thing that also has been opened up in all of this is that Andy Burnham wasn't the only one who was looking to kind of move. And actually, strangely enough, there's quite a lot of speculation that Wes Streeting's backers, I saw a headline at the weekend saying he already has 200 MPs who are absolutely solid behind him, which is kind of worrying unless you're a Blue Labour supporter. Yeah. But, Wes Streeting would be happy if Andy Burnham had kind of moved in and then won, because it would hasten a contest and it would sort of legitimize, it would make him not look like the guy who was going for Starmer. It would let him just enter a competition which had been started by Andy Burnham, letting him take the, plaudits and the flack for being the one who upset the apple cart. But anyway, that ain't going to happen. So then Wes Streeting's guys have got to sit there and wonder what happens after the disaster that's looked certain to happen in May. When does anybody move?
Quite probably going to lose this Gorton and Denton by-election.
Yeah.
And you might well see the Conservatives kind of of taking a back seat and letting reform come through and not doing too much to campaign for their own person there in order not to split the kind of right-wing vote. That might be a bit of a risk for the Tories, but would certainly be a humiliation for the Prime Minister and hasten his demise. But then if you're an opposition party, you have to be careful what you wish for, as a kind of poorly performing Prime Minister is not exactly a bad thing to have if you're looking to oust them in whatever it is, 2 or 3 years' time.
Indeed, I noticed that there's apparently posters being driven around. Well, it looks like to me it's one of those kind of billboard poster things on lorries being driven around Westminster, which would seem not as purposeful, but it seems SNP and Plaid have agreed to put up posters saying 100 days, because 100 days to the Senate and Holyrood elections, 100 days to get rid of Keir Starmer. So they're basically saying when they when they both win, as they very likely will be the largest parties, that will be the nail in the coffin.
I've seen this a few times. I really don't get it yet. Maybe I'm missing something bigger, and I'm sure Stephen Flynn has used this in a kind of campaign rhetoric that this is your opportunity to get rid of Keir Starmer, and I suppose trying to frame the Scottish elections as a referendum on the performance of Labour and the Prime Minister. But it's not very independence minded. It's a bit naff. Do we really care what happens at Westminster in the grand scheme of things? And does a poorly performing, do we want a better performing Labour Prime Minister? Is that what the aim of any independent supporter would be? I don't think so.
No, I don't see how that hits any loose ends at all. And also, I might be wrong, but parading it around Westminster, okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. But I guess there's the first sort of bit of, well, maybe there's been more coordination that you're aware of in years past, but there's Plaid and SNP coming out with joint lines now, joint lines for those elections. And I'd imagine that there would be more of that coming, because they, the case of each bolsters the other to an extent, although you've still got to beware. It just means potentially that the echo chamber now has a charming Welsh echo to it as well as our own. So, you've still got to get back to proper politics. And I gotta say, you spend after the Burns Supper in Newtonmore, I went up with Steve Rawson, brilliant filmmaker from Killiecrankie, with whom I made the film about the missing forests out in Loch Garry. Anyway, Steve, we're now making a film about essentially the clearances of Strathnaver, and the figure at the centre of that, Patrick Seller. Just going to restrain myself in the description of this man, who was actually had up for the murder of 2 elderly crofters in 1816 and got off because the jury was essentially the great and the good and other landowners. Anyway, so in the course of that, you speak, that doing up, staying with people, interviewing people, chatting about what's going on and everything. You just keep hearing about such incredible problems, and it's the same old ones. It's no affordable housing. It's still, you can't get your hands on land. It's, the modern clearances. One person we spoke to wanted her son, who's in Glasgow, to be included in the film, in a little film he was quite prepared to do in Glasgow, saying, I would much prefer to be back home, but there is no chance at all of me being able to get any kind of housing and any sort of job. And so all of this is still going on. And, come on, can we not have more ambition than this and start to try to move some levers around and just get out of this Groundhog Day? And yet I know I'm just screaming at the skies here, because it's not going to happen with the SNP. It's not going to happen with the Labour Party. It's not going to happen with Reform, Tories or the Lib Dems. The Greens have little flutters on some policies. They annoy the hell out of people about everything else. It's not a great moment in many respects. And yet there's the support for independence still sitting above 50%, so we've got to manage to put some structures behind that one this time. And I think behind the scenes, some of that is happening. But then I've been saying that for the last couple of years as well. So, la-di-da.
La-di-da. The SNP held on to the Glenrothes West by-election result. Zoe Hinsbent replacing an outgoing SNP councillor, and pushing Labour into third with a not very good showing for Reform, although obviously surged on their previous non-existence. Tories first in first preference votes with 182. Sorry, no, there's no wrong order. The Tories were down to 182. Reform only 725 first preference votes, and the SNP on 1,167. So quite a good showing.
Yeah,
there.
But it is. Although just look at the numbers. What's that as a turnout?
Preference. Yeah, a turnout.
38%, 41 at most. I know that's where we are with everything, but and it'll do. All of this will do to get over the line.
22%.
Right, there you are.
A council by-election, so it doesn't necessarily set the head of their light, but of course that just underscores the fact that councils are not as important as they should be.
And it underscores, coming back to the actual content of what people at Reform are saying, and Labour, because, when Anas Sarwar was talking about Andy Burnham, when he was asked at the weekend, what you're writing about Andy Burnham, he immediately flipped onto, well, he's done pretty well for Manchester and the sort of regional economies that we want to see happening in Scotland. Well, this is fine. And so Reform are also talking about a bonfire of quangos. Okay, there is a case for not replicating quango control when you've got Holyrood and what we currently have are regional sized councils. But the bit that's still missing that nobody will talk about is that we don't have local councils. And again, it feels like a kind of lost dream to start talking about genuine local democracy. But in all the best performing countries over the Shach in the other direction across the North Sea, they're running their public health from 400 local councils. In Norway, same population as us with 32. The direction of travel for successful countries is not to keep centralising the hell out of everything, although having it one strategic tier is useful. But all these guys are coming in and saying, yeah, big is beautiful, let's have regional, let's have this and that. The bit that makes the difference for all the really successful countries is the opposite end of the spectrum. It's the really small stuff, as I have said many times, and okay, apologies for the repeat. New thought, I just noticed while I'm in here looking at stuff from The Guardian that Deacon Blue said they are appalled by Malcolm Offord making reference to Dignity, their big hit song, during a speech. And so this will add to, wasn't the Labour Party using an SNP supporter in one of their videos? But Deacon Blue are, that's a pretty high profile set of people, and everybody knows that song, Dignity. But apparently he quoted it at length in the speech where he was made the first Scottish leader, which we might have missed because it was rather overshadowed by whatever really unpopular, creaking, archaic, backward-facing, right-wing Tory had jumped ship at the same time. But, it's good that people are just going, no, just get off with this. Because these guys are, rollicking around doing whatever they want. Malcolm Offord took the money. His last expenses bill before he decided not to be a Lord was 34,000 quid. He's a multi-millionaire. So you don't get to do just what you want when you feel like it. And you don't get to quote Deacon Blue, many of whose members are prominent independent supporters, by the by.
Yeah. And of course, it just immediately pings a string on everybody. They go, hang on, that's my song. That's ours. That's ours. Just on the Anas Sarwar kind of flip-flopping between, Labour big beasts, I'm still getting all these Anas Sarwar adverts where they don't actually say anything. I appreciate this is very early days of the election campaign, although there's only, as you say, 100 or fewer than 100 days left to run. But if you were in any way likely to be an incoming administration, in normal terms, you would have some pretty big sort of policy chunks behind you, and you would have expected, particularly when they're now running this kind of presidential style campaign for Anas Sarwar, that Anas would be more popular and it would have been kind of more spend and more front and more kind of speeches or kind of main policy announcements over the last year. This kind of running to the line with Anas Sarwar seems very high risk and a bit weird. And to quote the things, I'll do whatever it takes to fix our NHS and give Scotland the direction it needs. whatever it takes. But what does it take in us? What are the problems? What's going on?
Can I just say, first of all, that there's quite a few people have been in touch to say they're delighted with the way you say anas. Where the rest of us are saying Anas, but that's fine. I don't know which way it's properly pronounced. Is it your way?
I think, well, I mean, I would say it was my way, and I did, when I saw that came in, I had a kind of...
A wee chuckle.
Well, a wee chuckle, and then I did a bit of YouTubing to see how other people, and how it should be said as a sort of traditional name. But
okay, I'm just going to call him Mr. Sarwar for the rest of this bit then. But this is a really interesting point you've touched on, because, again, there was a very interesting piece in the Herald written by Colm McHale, who was a former executive committee member of the Labour Party. So this is an interesting one to come from essentially Scottish Labour. And he is observing that the kind of strategy seems to be Mamdanification. That's one you have to just watch carefully, which is basically trying to emulate the success of Zoran Mandami in New York by adopting his communication strategy. So smiley walk and talk videos, retro American fonts, jazzy music, jumping camera shots, apparently are peppering the party's social media feed. I've got to say, I only get kind of feeds of stuff for plantar fasciitis at the moment because of a really, really sore foot problem. So obviously you're Googling all the wrong things, my dear. But he goes on to sort of say that the problem for Mr. Sarwar is that Mamdani's victory didn't rest on just a firm grasp of the digital realm, but on this really big material offer and having an army of activists to communicate it, which Labour in Scotland has neither of these things. And he goes on then to a very interesting point, which again has sort of got skipped over. Possibly last week when you were away in the Big Apple itself, there was an announcement made by Sandy and James Easdale, who are multimillionaires. They're two of Scotland's richest men, and they are the owners of the McGill's bus firm, who handed Scottish Labour apparently a 6-figure donation. I'm still wondering if that comes in your pending period or not, election-wise, but the important point of it at the time was it was conditional, apparently, on Anna's, oh dear, making a much clearer Scottish party out of it and being much less in the pocket of unpopular decisions being made by Keir Starmer. So there was the first wee pill to swallow, that to get the money, you basically have to go against the, existing Sarwar line that, Keir Starmer is Big Jim Dandy. But there's one, but a much bigger point is that there's a whole project on at the moment to try to re-regulate bus transport. And the biggest opponents of that are Sandy and James Easdale with McGill's bus firm. There's a huge effort going on in Strathclyde particularly, which the Scottish Government and the SNP has not helped by not providing the regulations. I think this is still the case. Tell me if I'm wrong. Has still not provided the outline of how this tendering would rightly be done legally. So that's been holding up the Strathclyde effort to re-regulate buses, and the threat of legal action by McGill's. And these, this is, as we've said before, this is now acting as a really major obstacle to progressive change in Scotland, because you can put bits of legislation through, but you can't be sure that a private interest with very deep pockets will not threaten litigation, which the public body, charged with kind of taking on the new outlook, just hasn't got the cash, or the lawyers say we're not going into legal action. So I don't know how this works. People would need to know a bit about these guys. McGill's would have to ring a bell when they heard that news. But still, the point is, where are you on that? And he has been, Sarwar was asked about that, about re-regulation of buses. And, there'll be a lot of question marks as to where his real loyalties lie.
Unquestionably. And, they've been told by successive Holyrood elections, not including 1999, to separate and have a stronger Scottish offering. Joanne Lamont's branch office comments, they're kind of pathologically incapable of separating. And the comments are increasing, though, and certainly the suggestion is that come this electoral defeat, as seems likely for Labour, being pushed again into third or fourth place, in the May elections will require a real divorce settlement between the UK and Scottish Labour parties, and that they will actually have to kind of people up and do something more Scottish.
And the thing is, there are people in Labour who absolutely have a kind of pretty interesting and I find often very inspiring outlook actually on political change. One of them was prevented from even standing in the last election, which Annis won, because he's currently a councillor, and he was stopped. The same old story. He was stopped from standing as an MSP, so he couldn't throw six to start. Now, I mean, obviously, if you're an independent supporter, you're still going to be, I'm not going to be voting Labour anytime soon. But I mean, we need for the kind of good of this country as we're going forward, we need to have a party in there that is genuinely giving the SNP a run for their money on a lot of this stuff. I mean, again, looking at the column, I'll put the link in the notes. But this column is observing that when Anna Sarwar was talking about Scotland needing to have a choice, there isn't a choice when the Labour has basically ditched its working class Labourism, and it seems more interested in winning the support of multimillionaires than Scotland's workers. In that budget, there are plans to cut 11,000 public sector jobs. I mean, there was hardly a note of opposition because Anna Sarwar's party decided to abstain. Yeah. So they lost the position that they could even go in and say, yeah, okay, we might have abstained in all of this, just make life easier and everything. But hang on a minute, we saw a footnote. Yeah, what? 11,000 jobs. Let's claim that as our thing. And that would have got, publicity coverage quite rightly, and have put the SNP through its paces as to quite how it's doing that. But they forfeited everything there by just not deciding to valorise that cause that originated the Labour Party. And now they're stuck with the only time they hit the headlines is when two millionaires decide to support them.
Indeed. And I think it might be a faint attempt, and I really don't think it's going to push the button too much on the election, although I think we will see a significantly higher spend from Labour, because they can afford to, than we will from the SNP, and whether that actually moves the political dial or not in terms of people's voting, rather than just what the polling is telling us. The kind of a little bit like the 2024 election was kind of quite a low-key shift. Might do something to save their bacon in some regards, but very much remains to be seen. And their messaging's all over the place. We had obviously, we talked previously about Anna Sarwar saying that he didn't want the Prime Minister anywhere near the election, although he didn't quite come as clear as that in terms of his statement, and then Lisa Nandy, being quizzed by the Herald, sort of dismissed that and said that we're stronger as a team, and the Scottish Labour have got much more of a chance of winning when they've got the support of Westminster behind them. So they're all over the place in terms of messaging, but they've certainly got the cash to put it out there.
Yeah, but money don't buy you love on the old Palestine Action Front. Let's see that the courts have basically passed the idea of having a judicial review of Palestine action being proscribed in Scotland.
Permission hearing has been successful. That was just announced this morning. Craig Murray, with Joanna Cherry acting as lead advocate, have been granted permission to carry on their judicial review into the proscription of Palestine action.
And I love when there's a good article in the National, again, we can stick that in the notes. But the argument the UK government had put for this not going ahead was, first of all, that Craig Murray wasn't a formal member of Palestine Action. So he got, affidavits, including one from the co-founder of Palestine Action. So that seemed to be, knocked out. But the second, which is kind of, with the UK government lawyers arguing the Scottish government shouldn't be hearing this while there's a separate judicial review going on in England and Wales, which is just like you little, I mean, I know this is all kind of legalese and everything, but, it's like you little people. Can you just wait till, it's like the news where you are, let's have the the jurisdiction decision where we are, and you can just wait with your little thing. And the judge, which is, I'm sure, was not making any sort of banging any particular independency drum or anything, just said that, he's satisfied that it's okay for the judicial review to proceed in Scotland, notwithstanding the existence of English proceedings, which are at a more advanced stage. So it's like, aye, just go on yourselves, basically. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next. What does happen next?
Well, there'll be a full hearing in March on the 17th and 18th in the Court of Session in Edinburgh. And the permission hearing was quite spicy and quite fun. I thought Joanna Cherry making those points that if you took the UK government's position and said that actually you couldn't have this court hearing in Scotland and the Scottish courts couldn't look at it whilst the English courts were, that rather presumed that the English court would get it right at first instance.
Indeed.
And then went on to kind of amusingly refer to the Cherry case against the Advocate General for Scotland in the unlawful prorogation when Boris Johnson unlawfully shut down Parliament. Of course, I think a lot of people forget that whilst there was Gina Miller took an action in England and Joanna and others took an action in Scotland, the Scottish courts found that it was unlawful, and in England, the English High Court found that it was lawful. So the two courts found differently, and both decisions were appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court held with the Scottish court's position.
Right, so tasty moments ahead.
So and there'll be more to come on that.
And we just need to keep remembering what this is all about, because it's okay, there's Pyrrhic victories and there's arm wrestling and all that sort of thing. It's still people dying in Gaza all the time. Yeah. Well, this supposed, board of peace is rolled out with dictators, Tony Blair, the whole of Europe giving it a body swerve. But the veneer of something happening, the fact it's kind of dropped off the headlines a bit. There's less coverage going on from the broadcasters because we haven't even got the time to get into Ukraine and everything else. But that's what's at the back of all of this. And you only need one video from back watching this absolutely pitiful situation people are in, with tents, awash with water in freezing conditions. And of course, it's hard to believe that something so far south can actually be as cold as we are here. But I mean, it's an appalling situation. So that's why this stuff matters, because we have to be able to express how we feel about that, and we feel strongly. And just to come back to that, I mean, that Deacon Blue business, it's worth the quote from Ricky Ross on how dare Malcolm Offord use, the words of that song Dignity. And Ricky Ross said, to see the demonizing of desperate people with Reform's anti-immigration policies, to hear Scotland talked about as a place for our people and not strangers, that goes against everything we believe in. Perhaps Malcolm Offord has overlooked another song from our album. Loaded is sung at our gigs by the audience as well. The lyrics, it's just that you laugh because you're loaded, and things are different from there.
Well, I think that's a very good note for us to end on. And just remains for us to thank all of our sponsors for the podcast. It helps us keep going tremendously. And if you want to find more about how you do that, you can go on to lesleyriddoch.com/podcast and follow the links there to find out how to become a podcast buddy or chum. And we will see.
Oh, there's one tiny last little thing to say.
The film.
There's been a wee kind of mistake made with the booking at the Cameo for the February the 20th. It got double booked. So it's being shifted to Sunday, March the 22nd. Right, as we speak, this has just been alerted to me. So I'm not quite sure what the arrangements will be. It might be that I imagine the Cameo will just transfer the ticket straight over. Of course, it might be that if you've bought one, you can't come on that date, so you need a refund. So I can't say to you now what to do about it, which is sort of annoying. But what's the best thing to suggest? Well, we'll sort this out with the Cameo. So hold on, and we will some way get in touch with you imminently.
Grand. We didn't get a chance to talk about the Dick Gaughan gig.
Oh, wow. It was a stoter. Yes.
So, I'm sure I'm very jealous to have missed that, but it looked fantastic. And if there's any, I think you were asking whether the BBC Scotland were going to put up any coverage of that. If that ever surfaces, we'll make sure to link to that or bring that to the fore in the future. But that was a very good going over of all the 2 weeks of events, and on that note we will see you next week, chums.